Welcome back to part 3 of the Cortex lecture. This is the third and final part of the Cortex lecture. So brain plasticity was a topic, and let's just look at something like stroke, for example. What causes a stroke is a lack of oxygen to a part of the brain. All cells, including neurons, need oxygen to survive. And of course they get that oxygen from our blood. And so in the brain, of course, there are, well, leading up through your neck, you have large veins that carry large amounts of blood, like your jugular vein, for example. And as that gets into different areas of the brain, they branch off into smaller and smaller veins and such. And so what happens with a stroke is sometimes there's a clot. And I'm drawing a little example of like a clot here on the screen. And if the clot occurs there, for example, then there's no blood getting to these areas of the brain. And so because there's no blood, there's no oxygen. And neurons that are normally being oxygenated by that, neurons in this area would die if you don't get blood flow restored back to them. Generally, kind of the rule of thumb is within an hour. If you can get blood flow restored within an hour, a lot of people don't have a whole lot of damage, fortunately. And that's why it's important to know the symptoms of a stroke and get somebody help right away if you suspect they may be having a stroke. So anyway, if these neurons end up being dead because of a lack of blood flow, now they're not functioning. And immediately after a stroke, you would see in this person a lot of motor impairment because these are neurons in the motor cortex area. They might even have some speech problems if this affected Broca's area. But you'll notice over time with physical therapy and speech therapy that people sometimes regain some of those lost functions. Generally, they don't get back to 100%, but you can see an improvement. And the reason for that is, like when neurons normally would send information to your lips, for example, or to muscles in your hand, that information would travel down to that part of the body. But when you move muscles, you also get feedback sent to the brain. You can feel your body parts moving, right? And some of that would go to the parietal lobe, of course, like as part of your skin senses and such. When the feedback is not coming back, it's almost as if the brain recognizes that something's not working right. Because when we're wanting to move muscles and we can't, something is definitely wrong. And so what we believe is happening with brain plasticity is remember, there are literally billions of neurons in the brain. And so around this damaged area, you would see a lot of healthy neurons. And it's almost as though these healthy neurons are recognizing that something's not working, and they can actually change function and kind of pitch in and kind of take over the function that some of the neurons in this damaged area were doing. So it's kind of like if you noticed your neighbor was in the hospital and his grass was going really long, you might jump over and mow his grass for him, and that's kind of what's happening here. These neurons then start processing some information that was being processed by the lost or dead neurons and retake some control over that. So I'm going to show you one video of plasticity related to brain damage, and then there's another one that doesn't involve brain damage, because sometimes just adapting to changes require our neurons to communicate differently with muscles, and that is also a form of plasticity.
We are beginning to harness the brain's incredible ability to invent itself, then reinvent itself throughout life. girl is a testament to the amazing resilience of the human brain. Young Jody Miller leads an idyllic life as a 9-year-old girl. You would never guess that she has undergone some of the most drastic surgery imaginable.
Happy birthday.
Jody's first 3 years were textbook normal.
Happy birthday, dear Jody.
Then, about 6 weeks after her 3rd birthday, a storm of epileptic seizures took control of her brain.
She couldn't use her left arm hardly at all. She could barely use the left leg, seizing a good deal at the time, multiple types of seizures.
Ordinary life became impossible. Medicines did nothing, and the seizures threatened to turn fatal. Desperate, Jody's parents brought her to pediatric neurologist Eileen Vining.
We found her seizures were all coming from her right hemisphere. And we knew that there is virtually nothing else, nothing but Rasmussen syndrome that can produce that picture in a young child.
Rasmussen syndrome is a degenerative brain disorder that disrupts the electrical activity that makes our brains work. Tiny electrical explosions were flaring up in Jody's right hemisphere. As seizures became almost constant, she lost control of her left side. Only one radical treatment option remained.
We knew that she was never going to have her seizures controlled with medicine, and we knew that she and her family faced taking out that half of the brain.
Okay.
Dr. Vining recommended a daring surgery called a hemispherectomy. It would be performed by pediatric neurosurgeon Ben Carson.
The whole concept of taking out half of a person's brain would seem to most people impossible. Human beings are incredible creatures with a brain that is beyond belief in terms of its capabilities.
Now, you might think that guy looks familiar, and you're probably right. Ben Carson, who was recently a presidential candidate from the Republican platform, who, of course, then kind of withdrew his candidacy as Donald Trump was gathering more support. But Ben Carson, this was Ben Carson's career prior to getting involved in politics. He was really quite literally one of the world's most talented pediatric neurosurgeons. He does look a lot younger in this video than he has if you've seen him on CNN or something more recently. But yeah, very skilled guy.
To the point where we can take half of it out and still function in a normal way.
85% of our brain consists of the cerebral cortex, which is divided into 2 hemispheres, each with 4 main lobes. The cortex handles many of our higher functions. Areas on both sides control thinking, movement, and sensation. But the right side controls our left side, and vice versa. Jody would lose almost all of her right hemisphere, and the cavity would fill with cerebrospinal fluid. The operation has to be performed with great precision to avoid damaging the parts of the brain that control Jody's life functions, like heartbeat and breathing. The surgery went flawlessly.
What we're looking at here is an image, an MRI, that was done on Jody after her surgery. And what it shows us is the fact that we removed her entire right hemisphere. And what we're able to see here is indeed her very normal left hemisphere and all the beautiful gyri of her cortex. And we can see right down the middle, the right hemisphere that was there is now replaced by fluid.
But how could Jody function normally with only one hemisphere? It's because of a miraculous ability of the brain called plasticity. Our brains can actually change shape, creating new connections between neurons or brain cells to replace lost or damaged ones.
So this is a pretty dramatic form of brain injury. In fact, the removal of an entire hemisphere. And you'll notice that in the video, you probably noticed Jody doesn't have full mobility of her arm, and she does have a little limp, but by and large she will go on to lead a perfectly normal lifestyle. She'll be able to drive on all kinds of things. Without that surgery, she would have been having unpredictable seizures all the time and would not have a normal life at all. So it was pretty dramatic surgery, but because there's no cure for that, parents felt that there really wasn't much of a choice but to go ahead with that surgery. So things turned out pretty well for her. The other example I was wanted to show you was this guy who's adapting to change, and this is a little bit lighter story. This is a guy who's been riding a bike his whole life, which requires a lot of muscle coordination, but it becomes a habit, and it becomes so well learned that you don't even really have to think about it. Your neurons are really used to communicating well with really well learned tasks like that, and they're very efficient. So what happens is that he's given a bike that steers the opposite direction. So when he turns the handlebar to the left, the wheel turns to the right. And he's going to see if he can learn how to ride this bike, but he's going to have to retrain his neurons or how to communicate differently with the muscles. So turns out to be pretty challenging, and I'm going to skip through some parts of the video just for the sake of time and get to kind of some of the best parts. So.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels. Every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. All right, a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on.
So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike, and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird, though. It's like there's this trail on my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm, and I would wreck. But
Okay, so now at this point in the story, he's learned how to ride the backwards bike. I was going to get on a regular bicycle and try riding that.
It's backwards. This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment, I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I could only redesignate that bias. So what you're not seeing...
So I'll leave a link to the full video in Blackboard Unit 1 materials if you want to see the whole thing. But he basically rewired his brain through plasticity, and now he's going to have to undo that and rewire it again to get those neurons to communicate the way they normally do. Thanks for watching. Bye.